Corbolic V2. This is a super safe and effective natural anabolic. Not only is this product going to help you increase protein synthesis, which basically means muscle recovery and growth, it also may inhibit myostatin, which is a protein in your body that is known to inhibit muscle growth. This is a complete natural anabolic that works through multiple different pathways, has multiple trademarked ingredients. If you are a natural athlete looking for that edge, Corbolic V2 is what you need. Get yourself some.
So, hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Pro Physique Code. So you got me, Stephen Beaugrand, and Priscila Lamadrid today.
What's up?
Lamadrad.
Lamadrad, that's a new one.
Yeah, that's right. We're in the South today. Can't cut it out now, Lexi. I already introduced the podcast.
Manicola.
So, all right, so it's going to be the two of us today. Christina has children with ailments. Treatable ailments. Nothing to be crazy about, but I'm sure those of you who have children know that when they have ailments, they become more of a handful. But we are going to be talking about, I guess, like more sciencey stuff, right?
Yeah.
So we're essentially talking about, was it the ACSM conference? NSCA conference, and then
yes.
You just went to another one, right?
Yes, it was also NSCA. So it was the national conference in July and then regional in September.
Oh my gosh. Come on. I thought you were more than a one organization gal.
Actually, I've been to 3 different organizations as conferences.
That's what I thought. So for those of you who don't know, NSCA is the National Strength and Conditioning Association. So the other one I talked about, which was ACSM, is American College of Sports Medicine. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with those, they both have certifications for personal training. They both require you to have a bachelor's degree for those certifications to even sit and take the test. NSCA allows any bachelor's degree. ACSM requires a degree in the field. So those tend to be, in my opinion, some of the better options and more trustworthy options in terms of if somebody is passing those exams and they have that next to their name, they're probably a better or a more qualified or competent personal trainer.
Mm-hmm.
Or someone that you can trust.
Yeah, I would agree.
ACE is, I think, the only one that has people that oversee it.
I think so.
They're the only proctored exams. No other exams are proctored that I know of. So I think that's also a pretty safe bet. But a lot of the other ones out there, there's a million certifications, and their weight can be worth whatever you think it is. So I think it's important for people to recognize that these organizations, not only are they putting on these conferences, they're also kind of, they have some semblance of a hand in terms of certifications and what's going on. And the reason that's important is because we talk about evidence-based and looking at research and using that as a kind of platform that we say, all right, these tend to be best practice, or these things we know work, or these things we know don't work. Those conferences can be a really great opportunity to learn more about what's going on in current research in the field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a lot of, there are so many talks within these conferences, right? So I would, recommend for anyone who's like, looking to get into this kind of stuff, you can look up the schedules, the talks, all that stuff prior, and, write that stuff down, go to these different talks. And one of the biggest things I've learned from going to these conferences is the networking aspect of things, right? There are so many people, a lot of our work, you have in-person personal training, you have strength and conditioning in, real life and everything. But a lot of these connections happen, via LinkedIn, these different areas. But then you go to these conferences and you're able to meet these people in person. It's a whole nother, connection, right? Where they actually, they'll recognize you on LinkedIn instead of just being, a random connection or random, friend on there, anything like that. It is it's a personal connection now where you're like, hey, I know this person. Like I went to the NSCA's national conference in Baltimore in July this past year. I was able to meet Brett Schoenfeld, which is big in the field, Dr. Jonathan Mike, so many other people within the field. That was really cool to see all of them in person and, make a connection, be like, hey, Brad, I follow you on Instagram. I've read a lot of your research, the stuff you've done in the past, stuff you've done with Brett, all these different things, and being able to actually make that face-to-face connection it's really cool, and be able to really just, nerd out, right? For those of you who don't know, I have my master's and bachelor's in exercise science from USF, like Steven, and I have a very big sciencey, nerdy side to myself, hence going to all these different conferences and, like Steven said, utilizing the evidence-based practices of things, right? That's what we want to utilize, and then I guess we'll go into more detail a little bit later on, the research aspect of things, following up with that, different ways that you can, with continuing education. It's not just these conferences, right? Because they are, they cost money, right? You have to travel, you have to stay at a hotel if they're not, local to you, but it's also different aspects of continuing ed, like, newsletters, Body by Science, mass, seminars, webinars, all these different things you can do to continue just learning within the field, right? Within the field, we are, just forever students. We're always learning about different things. It really never stops, within our field.
I graduated, dog. Nah. Nah. So I think, and here's the thing where I think that it's important for people to recognize when we're talking about current research, most people, unless you're an academic, you don't actually have a lot of access to current and up-to-date research because it's not free access. You can't get it on PubMed. There's some places on the dark web where like you can get access to some stuff, but it's still normally not really new research, newer publications. And so there is this kind of divide in terms of information being readily available for a lot of people because, assume that you know how to read the research. You can work your way through the jargon. You have an idea of like statistics and what makes sense and what they're saying. Research in itself can be difficult to interpret, understand, and to pull something meaningful out of. Unless, unfortunately, what a lot of people do is just read the abstracts. Abstract could be completely different than what the actual research article is saying. But then on top of that, now it's this idea that, all right, well, great. Well, the most recent research that I can get on this topic that I'm looking for is 10, 15 years old, right? And I can get older research, but if there's newer research on it, I'm not getting access to that. I can't see it. So I don't know what that says. And I think, especially with some of the things like the lengthened partial stuff, and, you and I have discussed that obviously before and our stance on it. Like, but it's good to know the 100 gram of protein study. That stuff's good to be able to see and to know so that you can make an educated decision on whether or not you feel like the evidence presented there is enough.
Yeah, and that was actually a good question that was asked. I did a live for the, the transformation challenge. One of the questions was, if I get my protein and, let's say all at once throughout the day, right? So let's say like all in breakfast and like a snack and like the rest of the day, I don't consume protein. Is that going to give me, the same effects, et cetera? So that was, that was a popular topic that was brought up and, talked about the research side of things. And, that could be a whole nother, podcast in itself, talking about that protein, 100 grams, whatever. But, that's where it really came in handy, knowing these different things, knowing how to read research and, finding different ways, like you said, with the LinkedIn partials, right? I wrote a little bit of a, blurb for that. And it was, without being a current student, without having access to, these, these articles, these publications, it was more difficult to find, right? I could find things, but it just gave me, the abstract, or just gave me like a little snippet of things. And, doing my due diligence, I can't, within my good moral ethics, be like, hey, this is what this abstract says. Like, that's what I'm going to put in this article, right? I want to read through it. So, it's difficult to find these things that are, when you're not a student, because you get access through libraries, et cetera. But you either have to purchase them, or, if you have like a friend who's a student or something, or, et cetera. But other than that, it's a little bit difficult. Which is where it comes into handy, the different the different newsletters that are out there, right? Body by Science, Mass, they are also subscriptions, but it's going to cost you a lot less to subscribe to that and have that information actually broken down for you than, pay, $20 an article that you get from, a PubMed search.
Yeah, and so like I use a different one. Like I like the Alan Aragon publication.
That's a good one.
So that's the one that I'm normally looking at. So the AARR, Alan Aragon's research review. So just another research review that's pretty cheap. He actually has like a lifetime option on there. It's kind of expensive, but then you're just paying once. And the other nice thing is with a lot of those, you get access to all of their older ones too. So you can go back and look at anything that was like a month or 2 or 3 or 12 months ago. And those I feel like can be good ways. I will say that there have been some of those that I have seen that I didn't necessarily agree with after looking at the research myself. And I was like, well, I think maybe, you're posturing, but some of them, like I know Mass specifically, will oftentimes state limitations. And I think that that's something that we don't talk about a lot, but limitations of research and how far we want to take it.
Right.
Because and Brad Schoenfeld is like, I don't know, he's like premier. He's like the strength and conditioning guy, the hypertrophy guy, in terms of research. He's been around for a very long time and so many studies that he's published to help us understand what's going on in the human body and how to, I think, elicit some of the better responses that we can get with our current knowledge base. Because people also don't like to recognize that we don't actually know all that much. We don't know as much as we think we do.
Yeah.
So what was, I think, in talking about current research or the talks that happened, what do you think was your favorite or the most interesting talk that you got to see at either of those conferences?
Yeah, so the most recent one was the one in September. It was in Tallahassee. So it was just a day one. So Southeast ones are usually just a day's worth of info. They're relatively short. But that one was my favorite one. Oh God, there were so many that were good. So related to nutrition, there was one by Jenna Romanelli. She is the director of the nutrition program, I believe, at Parker University. Shout out to Jenna. She's fantastic. She gave us a lecture on sports nutrition. So, like in different case studies, athletes that she's worked with. And she works with primarily athletes with, high school, college, sports, right? Like, football, baseball, that kind of stuff. So she gave a really good lecture on, all that stuff, looking at, their physical demands for food, for, just their different aspects of sport and everything. So that was a great one. There was another one that she is the athletic director, I believe. She talked a lot about circadian rhythm and how they utilize, the Whoop with their studies. They how that affected things, when they traveled, when they played at home, all that stuff. And there was another one, I can't remember off the top of my head who it was, but that one was also great. Like all of them were super, valuable, and they each had a kind of a practical component to it as well. So they were able to like ask questions and, they asked the audience. One of them was more, track and field based. So he had us, go outside and run a couple of, demonstrate some drills out there to look at, VBT, which is velocity based training, which is very, very big in the strength and conditioning world right now. For, velocity based sports. So those are really cool. So there's, pros to each of those types of conferences, right? So the regional ones, you're able to get more hands-on with these people. There's more breaks, there's some breaks in there, lunchtime, you're really just all together, just eating together. So you're able to really pick the brains of these people a little bit more, a little more easily, right? With a national conference, you have hundreds, if not thousands of people that are there. So the Baltimore one was at their big convention center on the Bay. And if you didn't know where that person was going to be presenting, you didn't go up to them, it was difficult to, talk to them, or you had a connection, right? So I have a friend who's been part of the NSCA for 10 years. He's the one who was like, hey, go to this conference, meet some people. If you don't like it, you can tell me to, screw off, right? I didn't enjoy it, but I had such a good time. And, he was able to introduce me to, countless number of people that were there. So I'm trying to think of one of the talks there. I went to a whole bunch. They have some special interest groups that were really cool. So like specific topics. So they have one for nutrition. They have one for like women and strength and conditioning. All sorts of, they call them SIGs. So special interest groups. And trying to think of a specific talk within that one that I really enjoyed. But honestly, they were all fantastic. I couldn't really think of one in specific from that conference. They're all valuable in their own ways.
But I mean, I think that's like kind of a misnomer though, right? Or a misunderstanding that I think a lot of people have is that, okay, so us as I don't know, a lot of people think of it as bodybuilding coaches or weight loss coach or whatever it might be. They're like, okay, well, Stephen or Priscilla, like, why would you want to listen to a talk about somebody that's doing, track and field stuff? Why would you want to listen to a talk about somebody that's doing baseball? How do those things apply to you?
Right.
And I think that there's this misnomer of, okay, well, those people, they might have different demands, but it's not like physiologically they're so different from everybody else, right?
Right.
So there's going to be some carryover into things that we may use or we may not use,
Mhm.
or that we might even just want to consider for certain people
Mhm.
in terms of when that new information comes in. It helps you to broaden your horizons.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then one of the other things that's really nice is like, okay, if I go to that conference and I say something that's just wrong, somebody's going to come up and they're going to let me know why I'm wrong. They're going to tell me that I'm wrong. And they're going
Mhm.
to say, hey, I want to make sure that you're informed well on this subject. And since it's my specialty and this is what I do, I just want to let you know this is what the current, body of evidence says. This is what it is. So that way we can continue to give out correct information that is up to date and
Mhm.
what we call, I think, based on the preponderance of the research or the overall totality of the research, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because if we have one study that says 100 grams of protein is good, but it's only one, it's more of a question at that point. Can we
Mhm.
replicate that? Can we see that same thing happen in other research? Can we reproduce it in a way that's meaningful? And now, once that's been replicated and we've seen, okay, this is good, it's kind of gone through the rigors of testing and peer review and all the rest of the stuff. Now we can start really saying, okay, this is probably something that has some weight to it, and now maybe something that we can start utilizing in a
Mhm.
more, I think, realistic way.
Right. Yeah. And that's stuff that I see, on, social media, on, all these different things where, they'll use these titles, be like, oh, this does this or this causes that, or, this amount of protein will do this and that. And when you ask them to cite things, if they don't cite it, they'll be like, oh, well, this is one study that I found. It's like, okay, so we're putting all of our eggs into this basket of one study when, maybe 10 other studies tell us something different, right? And they just hold on, unfortunately hold on to, this narrative of, just that one study, kind of hold it and take it for its worth, when we really need to look at, the mass review of the study, right? You can't just pinpoint, one and be like, okay, that's it. That's what I want to use, when you have, 10 others that could say, completely different. And going back to the topic of, utilizing the information that used at conferences for, from track and field, from baseball, from training, like ball focused, athletes and stuff, switching that over to, lifestyle prep, that kind of stuff. There have been lifestyle clients that I have had where they, like to play sports on the weekends, or they have, these rec leagues that they're a part of, or I had a client in the past who was part of the Army ROTC. So looking a lot of, they have their military tests that they have to take, their PT. So taking that information and translating it over to those people, like you said, it's not going to be a direct one for one because they are going to be different, but utilizing the methods that they utilize. Like, for example, with the sports nutrition one, she talked about, having some athletes not utilize, tracking apps, right? They're young, she doesn't want them to use that quite yet. So utilizing more of, the hand portions of things, right? So palm of your hand for protein, ball of your fist for fruits and veggies, like a cup of your hand for carbs, and then the thumb length for fats, right? So she utilizes that a lot for her athletes. So again, utilizing that, which I've been able to translate over into some of my clients since then. If, macro tracking's too much for them right now, right? They have a lot on their plates. Let's say they're a super busy mom who's just like, I cannot sit down and, track things. It's just too much. Or, whatever the case scenario may be, taking that information, putting it onto someone who, just doesn't have that time, can be super valuable. Again, they're not an athlete. They're just, a mom, wanting to better their life, better their lifestyle, better their physique. And utilizing these things really, comes in handy.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing because like there'll be a lot of people who start off and they're not into the realm and
Hmm.
they're like just the mom. And I think that a lot of that comes from Like you have to use an approach that is at the level that that person's at. But when you start seeing success, they start taking that in a little bit more. And now like, oh, well, this is exciting. This is encouraging. I'm seeing things going well. Now I'm ready to invest more into the next step.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm like ready to say, okay, well, this one thing that I didn't really need, but I said I needed, right? Now I'm willing to like give that up so that we can make the next step and continue to make progress.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think that, you know, the what we do is like an amalgamation of all the research out there. It's just like this gelatinous blob of coaching of saying, hey, here's a bunch of different things that we know happen in different populations, and then taking those things and melding them to the person as an individual that we're working with.
Mm-hmm.
Because we talk about evidence-based practices, which that means like really looking at that research and what's been shown. But best practices means that blend of what, you know, what people are doing in the field and what's happening in the here and now, and what the research supports.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just research-based stuff, because there's some things that I do that there isn't really research on yet, right? Or there's not a lot of research on. There's not really much research on the whole, do we cut water, do we not cut water and sodium for stage, and how does that impact you know, fluid balance. There was
Mm-hmm.
one pilot study done, and it had a lot of, I think, weakness in terms of the fact that they didn't know what people were actually doing. They just kind of tested the body water stuff. So, you know, there's a lot of room for error there,
Mm-hmm.
or misinterpretation on things. But I know what I've seen work time and time again, and I know
Mm-hmm.
what I've seen be beneficial. So what am I going to do? I'm going to look at the educational content, the research, and say, well, I know how physiologically the body works. I know how it stores water. I know how those things are impacted and affected, and the other things that they impact and affect. And so I'm going to use that whole amalgamation of knowledge
Mm-hmm.
to try and make sure that I'm taking best practice.
Yeah.
And like that's one of the cool things is when you get to go out to these things, you get to ask people questions because there's this fun thing. Like I think that I don't know, I'm going to quote the industry. A lot of people treat it like it's secret, right? They treat it like there's a secret formula. They're the ones that know how to get you where you need to be.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to give you that little trick, that tip, and it's going to make all the difference. So it's like people trying to keep everything secret, and there's not a lot of sharing about approaches, how people do things, and putting out information on those things.
Mm-hmm.
And if there are, I will say I think some people are not fully honest about that too. I think it's getting better. More people are starting to talk and be a little bit more open and honest about it, but it's not really there. Whereas in the scientific community, it's all about sharing knowledge.
Yeah, so with that information, right? We don't want to gatekeep information. There is so much out there that we can learn from each other, and on social media too, right? Our goal is, not just as coaches to help our clients, but within that realm of social media, helping the masses, giving as much information as we can, because we know there's a lot of information out there that's, valued information, misinformation, etc. So the more that we can share our knowledge, right? It's not the Krabby Patty secret formula, right? Where we're gatekeeping it, we're keeping it there. We're trying to give the information that we can to our clients, to people that we work with, and having going to these conferences, people are more than happy to talk to you about it. They will, you can pick their brain. I was able to pick the brain of Dr. Jonathan Mike, who talks a lot about eccentrics. So that's a lot of his work. So me, him, and Tom were able to go out to dinner one night and, just nerd out about eccentrics. I had a couple questions. There were some things that I thought were true. And he was like, no, this is actually what we saw within our research, within our studies.
Like
so it's
what?
really
Don't just say that. Like what?
So he said with eccentrics, so it is, there's a lot of talk about it, relating to hypertrophy and, utilizing eccentrics a lot for hypertrophy. And he said that it can help, but there's not enough evidence to be like, yes, like it is definitely going to, help to the extent that, some people are putting out some research, some influencers, etc. So it does help to an extent, but not the extent of what people are making it out to be. So that's essentially the gist of what we were talking about there. So that was pretty cool to know, because I do use eccentrics with, clients and such, but now knowing that, hey, that's not the end all be all for hypertrophy was really cool. Now I can utilize that within my training with my clients. So it's just about, sharing information, everyone's so willing to chat with you. I think I lost my voice for maybe like a day after that conference, after talking to so many people. So it is really just truly invaluable.
Yeah, I think that's gosh, I was talking to Campbell about going over and visiting there here soon, just because he's local and we're here. But it's one of the things I really like is that there's pretty much always going to be something that escaped my viewpoint and or maybe even my grasp, that like getting to talk with those other individuals really helps to solidify. Because I use eccentrics sometimes, but more
Mhm.
for people if they have like tendonitis, right?
Mhm.
To work around things like that, because that can be a good workaround. In terms of the tempo rep stuff, I would say for me, I don't really do a lot of that. I just want it controlled, essentially.
Mhm.
But you're right. The entire point of like influence is that they're sensationalizing things.
Mhm.
They're making it exciting or doing it in some way that you want to hear it. And it's like, all right, well, great. But a lot of times those people have no clue what the hell they're talking about. You know, they're telling you to go do juice cleanses and the the colon cleanse and all that kind of stuff, right? And you're like, wait, why?
Why?
Like, I'm healthy. Why would I need to do anything? No, it makes you way better. I was like, but does it?
But I feel good. So
So
like,
I mean, the misinformation that's out there, and I think that's where a lot of, because what you said earlier definitely happens. People will take a piece of an abstract, make a video out of it, put a really catchy title on it, and say this, and it's like, no, actually not that.
mhm.
That study might have said that, or that's not even what that study said,
Right.
and like that's not what we're trying to do here. Like that's just you trying to get followers and clicks and views and make money.
Mhm.
And so, because that's what, to be fair, is rewarded, the algorithm rewards those kinds of things typically. Like that's what a lot of the information that's easy to find and easy to get.
Mhm.
And I was watching the news the other day and they were saying, oh yeah, protein could be bad for your kidneys. And I was like, doctors still say that, but
Mhm.
the evidence does not support that. They've looked at it.
No.
They've done studies with extremely high protein intakes, and it's
Mhm.
just not supported by the evidence. But
Yeah.
it's been one of those things that's been said for so long
Mhm.
that like people just are like, "Oh yeah, this," and I'm just like,
No. Yeah.
no."
Yeah.
Like
There's
I
so
get it.
much. Oh, there's so much with that protein. So there's always that little asterisk, right? Of like protein, on that topic, right? Protein's bad for your kidneys if you have a kidney disease, right? If you cannot process protein, adequately, right? So it's those little nuances where, that is the topic, like you said, that has been, that same statement has been repeated time and time and time again. And it's one of those that just continues to try to be debunked because it is not the case. Like you said, people have done studies with, 2 grams per, what is it? Not 2 grams per kilo. Anyway, it was like a huge number.
I mean, I've definitely seen studies with 2.2 per kilo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's pretty high, protein intake. And they've been fine. If you're a healthy individual who, kidney levels are fine, we're processing everything fine within the kidney, everything, then having a higher protein intake is fine, or just protein in general, right? Because I could do a whole nother thing on, the RDA, different, numbers that are recommended for, protein, carbs, and fats. But, you know, even the RDA is, low for for what we
So
want
low.
people
I
to
mean,
intake.
for anybody that wants to be active and who
Yeah.
cares about performance or their like the ability to grow and maintain muscle.
Hmm.
Um,
It's
but
extremely low.
and here's the other thing. People are like, but the RDA is this. And I was like, okay, well, do you recognize the population that the RDA is for? Because that's for the normal general population. If as a country we have a large portion of the population that is overweight and or obese and is extremely inactive and sedentary, and you're trying to be not that, does the RDA still fit for you in a way that's going to help you to get the most out of that? And I think that's another important question,
Hmm.
again, that should be asked when we're looking at these things. And I'm not trying to say the RDA is bad. No.
Right.
But if you're like, oh, well, I'm getting 80 grams of protein and I weigh 200 pounds, I'm like, okay, well, that might be part of the reason why we're not building muscle as fast as we want to,
Mm-hmm.
because we can say with pretty good certainty based on the research we have now, which again still isn't even that much, right?
Mm-hmm.
That more protein is going to be more than that for your body type or your weight is probably going to be a benefit for you.
Right. Yeah. And, it's looking, going back to, looking at the research and everything, it's learning how to, interpret what they're saying within it. Right. So, this took, a degree's worth of, reading research articles, being a research assistant, doing all these things to learn how to read research. It's one of those things that practice makes progress with it, right? Because you're always learning how to continue reading it. There's a lot of statistics that goes into it. I think, that was one of my least favorite classes. Anywho, so there's a lot of statistics that goes into it. So it is a consistent, work in progress when you're reading these things. So, going over, limitations, sample size, what effect, what type of, methods are they utilizing? Can we also apply these methods to the real world, right? So utilizing our clients and everything, because the practices that they utilize. So for example, if you're looking at let's say you're looking at a clinical study for something, right? Most of these people are going to be in a controlled environment in a metabolic ward where they have controlled meals, they have controlled exercise, everything is controlled by by a group of people that is leading the study. So if you're taking that and you're trying to make that into a, lay population person who is, just going about their daily lives, it may not translate over as well, right? So taking those results with a grain of salt, taking, looking at these situations that they're in with their methods, their conclusions, what type of statistics they utilize. There's so many things that goes into reading it and being able to interpret it and put it towards, towards working with your clients. And it takes a lot of time to, go through that. So if someone says like, oh yeah, I read the research in like, a few minutes and this is what I got from it, I'd be a little red flag, kind of popping up
Yeah,
there.
I mean, I can skim through it. Probably it takes me still 5 or 10 minutes to skim,
Right. Mm-hmm.
and I look to see if there's anything that's like, wait, does that sound right?
Right.
Meh. Mm, do these
Mm-hmm.
things agree? Do the numbers
Right.
agree? That kind of stuff. But the people being in a metabolic ward, like those kinds of nutritional studies are pretty few and far between. Because here's the other
Yeah.
thing. I think a lot of people, maybe they do or don't recognize it. The private universities, the industry, it doesn't have the same kind of funding. So like if you look at a Pfizer study, they're
Mm-hmm.
throwing a ton of money into that study because it's
Right.
extremely highly regulated. And they want to make sure that everything is done appropriately so that they get approval. Now, for us, we used to go to the rec center and just try and recruit whatever bro and sis was coming into the rec center. That,
Mm-hmm.
hey, you want free protein and be able to work out in the basement with us?
Yep.
Which sounds
Come to
really
the
creepy.
basement. We have protein.
Yeah, come to the basement. Let's lift some weights. We'll watch you do squats. Ugh. um,
Yeah.
but it's like that's who we got.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to also take into consideration the idea that, okay, if this was a nutritional study, did they have diet logs? Did they not have diet logs? Like, I've known people in studies that are like, oh yeah, I was supposed to do this, but I'm doing this instead. I'm like, cool. So you're going to throw the numbers off. Great.
Right. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Like you should have just not done that, or just drop out. Just drop out of the
Mm-hmm.
study if you're not going to do what it takes.
Yeah.
But those things still happen.
Mm-hmm.
So research, it is the best thing that we have, but it is not perfect.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's why there has to be that openness to say, okay, I think understanding the physiology on a pretty in-depth level is the biggest BS sensor that like we can have.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as somebody says something, they're like, oh, because I think I misread something today, and it wasn't what it said, but somebody was talking about how um insulin levels increase blood sugar. I was like, what? Like
What?
that's absolutely the inverse. Like that's completely incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I have to look into it because they were talking about how it was sodium, right? It impacts sodium or water retention.
Okay.
So now I'm like, okay, well now I have some studying to do and some questions to answer because I don't know that well enough to say
Mm-hmm.
yay or nay.
Yeah.
So, okay, now we got to learn.
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
it had been the other one, in which people say weird crap all the time, like broccoli somehow bad for you, or carrots and fruits are bad for you because they're sugar, it's like, F off, dude.
Yeah.
Like, no, those things don't make sense. And we can explain pretty pretty emphatically that why and how those things don't make sense, you know, because fruit, even though yes, we classify it as a sugar, is not the same as the processed sugars that we typically, say are quote sugars. They have fiber, they have micronutrients, so they're still a nutrient dense food. It is a completely separate thing, and the way that your body has to break down and utilize fructose is much slower of a response than that processed sugar stuff. So saying
Yes.
that fruits are bad because of sugar is just like, oh my gosh. It's like
Yeah.
saying the sky ain't pretty because it's got clouds. Like,
Right.
what? That's
Yeah.
not right, but whatever.
Yeah.
I couldn't come up with anything better. Sorry, y'all.
No, that's a good one. No. Yeah, it's just that's a whole other tangent there. Just we could do a whole episode on like debunking myths, popular, fitness myths, nutrition myths, that kind of stuff. So that would be fun. But yeah, so and also, I wanted to go back to something you said, knowing that, talking about that study of like insulin and blood sugar and all that stuff. You're like, well, I'm not sure. So like I have to go into that. So it's it takes a lot, from a coach to be like, hey, not a lot really, just being humble about, if you don't know something, willing up to it and fessing up to it and be like, hey, I'm not sure. Let me go ahead and do some research. I'll get back to you on it. So that's, in my opinion, a green flag when it comes to talking to a coach or, a fitness professional, because we don't know everything, right? As much as we want to know everything, we don't. There's so much out there that we can still learn. So having the being humble enough to say, hey, I'm not sure. And I've done that multiple times as a coach. They'll ask the questions. I'm like, hey, I'm not sure. Let me go ahead and do some research. I'll get back to you with that, in an email here, shortly within a couple days, etc. So it takes a lot to be able to, just do that and be like, hey, don't know. Let me find out for you, because then we both learn, within that, because then it becomes more information, more of a tool in your toolbox. So you can help others who have that same question.
Well, that's also one of the cool things that I like about the academic community is because things are very, very direct in this group of people at this age range and in these considerations and in these positions, this is what we would expect to see. And so what I have always found with any of my professors at school, people at conference, any of that kind of stuff, is that people are very, very willing to say, I don't have an answer for that, or that's not my place, or,
Right.
just, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so not only is it cool because, all right, great, they're not giving you bad information, right? They're not giving you an incorrect idea of something that you're taking and putting it at a level where it maybe shouldn't be in terms of how true it is. But a lot of the times they'll be like, but this person knows.
Yes. Yes. That's my favorite thing.
And so those connections allow you to get really good, valid answers to the best of our ability in a way that, you wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah. And then you network more, right? You get to know that person, you get to know their specialty, you get to, pick their brains about different things. And, yes, they answer your question, but then, you look at their research, you're like, oh, well, I read this, this, and this, and I have a couple questions on here. So you develop more, more connections, more networks, so that, you can continue to refer people to other resources, to other information, and it just becomes like a nice big old web of information and networking, which is really neat to have. It's good to have, that in your back pocket to help out.
Yeah, like for me, I like it and I hate it because it's not that I don't like people, but I don't really like people, which is a weird thing to say because my client's like, he's so friendly. I was like, yeah, like I think that I'm much more of an introvert. So like those things, I'm like, ah, great. Now I have more relationships I have to keep up.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
"Wah."
Like, oh man. Yeah. So those conferences will like fill my extroverted battery, right? From working from home and everything. I used to work with, more people in person prior to COVID. And, those fill my extroverted batteries like just right there to the top. Like I'm perfect. And then I come home, I'm like, okay, like nice little solitude for for a little bit. So it's a little mixture of, introverted and extrovertedness. But yeah, definitely if you want to go to these conferences, if you want to, expand your information, know that you're going to be talking to people all day, most likely. And don't be afraid to go, by yourself. That's one of the things that, held me back in the past, was going by myself and being like I'm an extroverted person, but I'm still working on, going up to people and be like, hey, I'm so and so, this is what I do, etc. Right? So going to these conferences and, not be scared to go by yourself, like I said, look at the schedule, look what you want to do, and just introduce yourself, right? The worst thing they can do is say, hey, I'm busy, can we talk later? Right? Or they're just like, there's like, no, I
Yeah,
don't have
normally.
time. That's the worst thing that can happen.
Yeah, and by the way, when Priscilla says look at the talks, those are essentially lectures, right? So
Yeah,
those are,
lectures. Yeah.
yeah, they're giving you a rundown on what the research is saying, what they've been doing, and what their understanding of that is.
Yeah. And sometimes they'll have a practical component where they will, pull people from the audience in the seminar and be like, hey, this is what we're doing here. Like my buddy who took me to NSCA, he presented at the one in Tallahassee and he did a whole like kettlebell demonstration. So he pulled people from the audience, be like, hey, this is how we, this is how we hold it for a kettlebell snatch, or this is how we hold it for a snatch. This is how we hold it for a swing, etc. So they have both of those components. Not all of them will, because some of them are more on a molecular level, a physiology level, right? It's a little bit difficult to to do a practical component with that. But if it's more like there was one that I remember a girl did one on like core strength and core training. So then she finished her lecture, and then in a separate room they were having the practical component where everyone got on the floor and did the exercises, walked through everything. So yeah, that was pretty cool to know that like, hey, I can take, not only am I learning this stuff visually, but if I'm also a kinesthetic learner, no, and everyone learns differently, right? So if I'm a kinesthetic learner, I can actually go on the ground, do these exercises. So I know what it's supposed to look like on the client, what they're supposed to be feeling, different cues to help out with, their form and technique, right? If the client likes to, um, let's say that they can't feel their core and they feel it better, when you push on their abdomen, you know where to push, because then they're like, oh, okay, that's what helps. How do I push my lower back into the ground? Put your hand underneath, push your lower back into it, etc. So there's just, it's a wealth of information. Honestly, I've never regretted going to a conference. My first one was ACSM in Orlando, 2018. I think it was. That was big. That was a big one. That was a lot of fun. And then ISSN, which is the International Society of Sports Nutrition.
Oh, you suck. Way to beat me to it.
Yes. I went to it in, oh gosh, when was that? Was that 20? Oh gosh, when was that? 2022, maybe? It was a couple years ago. Went to that one, saw Dr. Campbell, met up with Madeline Seidler. Shout out to Madeline, she's great. So that was a really cool one, learning more about the nutrition aspect of things. That was also a regional one. So that one was really cool to go to. So I got 3 societies under my belt.
And Campbell used to actually be the president from 2015 to 2017 for
Yes.
ISSN.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep. And now he's still on, some position stands and
yes.
all that stuff. That's another cool resource, is the position stands that these organizations put out. So NSCA has position stands, ACSM, ISSN. So that is what a position stand is literally just their stand on a certain, topic, right? Wherever they fall into it, it is just it's like a review article. It's like a meta-analysis, a systematic review of what their point and takeaway is from this topic, and then they put it together, and then that is pretty readily available with the position stands.
Yeah. So I mean, those are all pretty, I would say, I think we've given a couple like good, easy, reasonable places where you can find information, even if you're not able to make it out to the conference, because the conferences aren't cheap. They're
No,
cheaper
they're not.
if you're a member, but they're not cheap. I think back when I was in school, non-member was still like $300
Yeah.
for like the ACSM conference. And I was like, I was broke. I was like, no, I'm paying for school out of pocket. Like I go to school 4 days a week and then I work 3 doubles. Like, no, absolutely
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, they're not cheap. I think the regional one was like, and I signed up early, so they have like early bird registration or whatever. So I think that was like $70. But the national one was a couple $100, and I had just become a member with NSCA before that, so that was like 150 and then like 200. So it wasn't cheap to go to. They provide food, which is nice, so they'll give you like lunch and breakfast and that kind of stuff. But I was there from 8 a.m. until 6 p.m. for, all the days of the conference. So you go and you try to get your money's worth out of it.
Yeah. So like the conferences themselves may be really good options for like practitioners. Like you're a trainer, you need continuing education credits. Because like if you have a certification, which I believe you do,
yes,
you have to have CEUs to keep that up. For me, I'm like, I don't have any certifications. I have my degree on the wall. I'm like, if that's not good enough for you, well, I don't know what to tell you.
Well,
But so I don't have to go to those things, which means,
mhm,
okay, maybe those other options are good options for me in terms of finding out what's going on or where things are at currently, or even more currently than maybe what I would have thought prior.
right.
Uh,
Yeah.
like
And
maybe,
the CECs are, they're pretty cool also, right? There's certain, credits that you need. Like I have my certification, my personal training certification through ACSM. I got that back in 2016, I believe, and I've just upkept it. And they usually they keep you certified for like, I think it's 5 years or so, 5, 6 years. And then you have to not redo, but, do the CECs and everything. And they usually give really good stuff. So you can do the conferences. They have like little seminars and classes you can take online. That's what I did a lot from my ACSM one this past year. So there's different things you could do. I wish I'd have to probably look into it or maybe talk to my buddy about it to see if there's like a research one where you can, put out like your own little research review or, little things like that where it'll help you to gain CECs. That'd be a cool idea to bring up to the boards.
yeah, I mean, I don't talk to the boards because I'm a peon. I'm a nobody over here. Um, I'm just like, because it's funny because some of the other ones, like, so I think a lot of the relevant research for what people that listen to us is probably more like Eric Trexler, right? He
Yeah.
does a lot of like nutritional, like bodybuilding style. Bill Campbell, same thing.
Hmm.
Those are the names that really stick out to me in our realm
Hmm.
because I'll be honest, I don't think as many people worry so much about building muscle as they do about losing body fat. That tends to be the bigger, I think,
Yeah.
attention point.
I'd say that's an
Um,
accurate statement.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I think those are probably some of the names that people that follow us that are like, oh, these guys seem like they're smart. Like, well, I'm just stealing it from other people. There's a couple of them, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And there's Brett too. I mean, that's more of the glute hypertrophy aspect of things, but that's another name that really, comes to mind within the bodybuilding world. There was another one that I was just thinking
Menno.
about and it slipped my mind.
Menno's one of them. He puts out a lot of
Mm.
research stuff.
He worked with
Um,
Bill.
yep, he has worked with Bill.
Mm-hmm.
Some of his stuff I really like. There's been a couple that I've disagreed with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but and then there are others too. Oh my gosh, Eric Helms, duh.
Yes, duh. That's who I was thinking of.
Sorry, Eric. He's never gonna listen to this. Doesn't matter.
Sorry, Eric.
He doesn't know who I am either. It's fine.
Yeah. That's another one. Yeah, that's another big one within the industry. What's his the podcast 3D
That's the 3DMJ podcast. Yeah,
3DMJ. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's the natural bodybuilding, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think you really see a lot of research that is like purported as non-natural,
Mm-hmm.
because normally those there's things. But I've definitely known, and when I was an undergrad, people that were in research, not our research, let me be very clear, but people that were in other universities' research that were doing supplement studies or training studies that were definitely not natural athletes while they were
Mm.
doing that. Again,
It's also like, did they report it? Was that,
right.
within that, right? It's also looking at that stuff, right? Do they report what they need to, right? Is there a conflict of interest? There's so many other, things like that to look into it. Because if, let's say someone does a study on, X supplements and they find X conclusions where there's, this great, big old, perfect P score, P level, P value, and
Value.
the statistics are, perfect, conclusions are wonderful, but then you go to the bottom and they're like, oh, funded by said supplement company, right? So it's looking at that and be like, okay, let's look at other studies that look at this supplement, that are not affiliated with them and see, if that research still comes to light.
And like, let's be real. Doesn't mean that research isn't valid.
Correct.
Like
Yeah.
like that 100-gram protein research article
Mm-hmm.
that was funded by the milk or the dairy people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean that it's not viable or it's not valid? No, the data
No.
is the data.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but and I feel bad because I'm like, are people gonna think I'm hating on research or are they gonna think that I love it? 'Cause
Right.
I'm not really sure. And it's like, no, I just want to give you what I find to be an honest understanding,
Mm-hmm.
because in the same realm where we talk about research is amazing. It's great. It is the best that we have, but it is also not an end all be all. Like
Yes.
there's still a lot that we need to learn, and you know, we may or may not ever even get there.
Mm-hmm.
And like we don't want to put it on this pedestal above all other things either. We
Right.
want to use it as a sounding board and like a guidance tool, I think, in a lot
Mm-hmm.
of our protocols and what we do, how we
Mm-hmm.
approach health and fitness, weight loss, weight gain, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then say, okay, well, these fundamentals we know are true. Now, how do we approach the situation in a way that holds true to that fact?
Right. Yeah. And there's, like you said before with, utilizing, the cutting water, that kind of stuff, sometimes it's that anecdotal evidence too, right? Like you said, it's not, that's not super researched on right now. Hopefully there's, more questions that are brought up and, the research and people start doing more on it. But it's that, combination of the research seeing what is actually, viable and useful, utilizing our anecdotal evidence to create those best practices, right? That we were just talking about. So it is, like you said, research is a guideway and a pathway to help create these best practices so that we can utilize them with our clients. And, like I say, utilizing anecdotal evidence is a big one, and yeah, just kind of translating that to where, to where we need it, to what the client needs, adjusting things. Because again, you're not going to be, in some situations, you're not going to be able to completely replicate what they do in a study to a client, right? And that's an N1. Well, N is the sample size. So that's an N1 when the study could have had an N of 50, right? There's a big, difference between those two.
And that's what was included at the end. So if they got rid of outliers and other
Right.
information, that you don't see that.
Mhm. Yeah,
Okay,
people who
so
drop out of the study, etc.
100%. Okay,
Yeah.
so to kind of, I guess let's take it to our last. What was, if there's one thing that's like on your mind, in your brain, like, okay, this is what people need to know, or this was the cool thing, or this is what I loved about this in terms of being at the conferences, the
Hmm.
information put out there. What is that for you that you think is like valuable, or that you
Oh,
found valuable?
um, big thing that I took away from one of those conferences.
On the
I'd,
spot.
yeah, right on the spot there. Love it. Love it. I'd say what was it? Probably the biggest thing that probably stuck with me was that circadian rhythm information. So, making sure that you have a set schedule. So they saw with some of the soccer players that did, that did not stick with their schedule, who, they had these practices, they had travel, but they were, up at, let's say 11 p.m., but then woke up at 9, but then they went to bed at like midnight and then they woke up at 6 and their schedule was kind of, all over the place. They saw a decrease in performance, right? They weren't able to see the changes and the increase that they needed to for their sport compared to the girls who had a certain schedule, right? So she had a whole like picture of, this is the best time to wake up, this is the best time to cool down, this is the best time to do this and that. So I'll have to try to find it. I think I took a picture of it. Where I think it was like, as soon as the sun starts to set, that's when you should start kind of winding down from your day, right? Kind of dim the lights, kind of bring more of like a relaxed environment, cool down the house a little bit. And then you start to unwind, you start to go to bed around like 9-ish and then get up with the sun. That's usually where, our circadian rhythm is going to be better and we're able to get that rest in that sleep period, right? That we need, right? We're able to get more REM sleep, we're able to get more deep sleep and be able to recover, which again, it was done in a population of soccer players, but you can directly translate this over to athletes, within the bodybuilding, within, lifestyle clients, right? Because that sleep that we get is super important to how our body recovers, how we manage our stress, all these different things. So having that set schedule, sleep wake schedule, even on, even on the weekends, right? If we want to sleep in a little bit, fine, but we don't want to go, maybe sleeping, 7-8 hours during the week, perfect, to them sleeping 12 hours on the weekend. And then you kind of have to get your schedule back in check over the course of the week. So honestly, I think that was one of the big things that stuck out to me, was trying to keep a good rhythm with your circadian system and, going to bed and waking up at, around the same time, kind of having a nice schedule. I think it was like peak energy and all this stuff. So it was just fascinating. I loved that talk. So that was at the FSU conference.
Yeah, and so I don't think that's new news.
No.
I think what was the book When by Daniel Pink, right?
Mhm.
That was one of the ones that I read that really is like started getting me into circadian rhythm stuff, and
Mhm.
I think trying to understand that a little bit better.
Mhm.
But like, I think the people who have the most issues with that are people that do shift work and switch from
Yeah.
nights to days. It
Mhm.
makes things much more difficult. But you
Yeah.
and I, like, we pay attention to if somebody feels like they're sleeping well or not, right?
Mhm.
And I can tell you almost every single time if somebody's not sleeping well, they're not responding well.
Mhm.
But like, there's nothing that's surprising to me about the importance of that sleep value
Mhm.
in the process of controlling how your body looks, performs, and responds.
Mhm.
Um, and now there's a whole lot of stuff that can go into that. And you hear things all over the time, like, do you need blue light blockers, or do you need the red glasses at night, or like, do you
Right.
need this? It's like, uh, how much sleep do you need? Well, it's probably a range, and yours is different than mine.
Mhm.
And so, like, the real question is, when do you feel your best? And I think this is where I like to challenge people. When do you feel your best? Is it after a day off when you got to go to bed early and sleep in a little bit extra later?
Mhm.
Is it on Monday when you feel really refreshed from the weekend and you woke up at this time and you just started getting going?
Mhm.
Right? People talk about delaying coffee a little bit until, the natural cortisol levels come up. Some people's
Mhm.
cortisol levels are high at night and low in the morning, right?
Mhm.
There's inconsistencies there. And maybe that's something that they need to address.
Mhm.
So there can be, and here's like, there's so much nuance in it.
Yeah.
And maybe you have nuance, but it's not so much nuance, right?
Right.
Like, but there's still nuance. And I think those are the things that are cool, because when you can show up and say, these players played better under these circumstances,
Mhm.
I think that's a pretty good argument for us to say, okay, well, we should at least be aware of those circumstances then, and trying to keep them as beneficial as a place as possible.
Right. And find, find their balance, right? Find what they can do. Like you said, with the shift work and everything, their circadian rhythm's going to be different than, someone who does a 9 to 5, or, they just have, quote unquote normal schedule. So finding your balance, and that's what we talked about, with our clients, right? Finding your balance, finding what works for you, meeting them where they're at and adjusting things. And, I can say the same thing. I have clients who will, not get a great night of sleep, and we see it in the data the next day, right? I have spreadsheets for them, right? I have them track, how much they sleep, how are they feeling, body weight, etc. So you're able to really see the direct correlation there between, not great quality sleep. And also, you can get a lot of sleep, but it's broken up and that's not good quality. So when you bring that down, it actually brings it down to how much sleep you're actually getting. So it really, like you said, it's not new evidence. It's not something new that I learned. It's something that helped to emphasize it and get a little bit more in detail with it, because sometimes it's that, right? Sometimes you learn, kind of the foundations of things, right? Just kind of like the tip of the iceberg. And then you go to these conferences or learn from research or learn from, these different modalities. And then that tip, you hit it, and then, the iceberg breaks and you get, all this different information from it. So there's always something, underneath that layer of what you're currently learning.
Yeah, I do like it because it keeps you at the right end of the Dunning-Kruger
Hmm. I
curve,
haven't heard that phrase.
Um, yeah, well, so I'm always thinking about the Dunning-Kruger because, like, I see so much social media, and it's constantly people who know very little about a subject have very high confidence.
Hmm.
I love that you guys have confidence if that's you. Like, confidence is great. But the more that you learn as you go, your confidence now becomes lesser because you recognize, oh, I really don't know shit. Like,
Yeah.
this is so much more of an in-depth thing than I recognize.
Yeah.
And then that becomes motivation to be like, "Oh, okay, well, if I care about this, how do I actually start to understand it?" And then that motivates you to actually be in a spot where now you are well educated and informed.
Hmm. Yeah. And
Um,
you're asking questions.
I hate asking questions.
You ask
I
questions,
don't.
you get new answers.
Yeah. So, it's one of those things that it also, like, being around those people, it does. It can make you think differently about something because maybe it's just, I like to use this example, right? If I tell my wife something day after day for years, and she just never hears it, right? It just doesn't click. And then somebody says the exact same friggin' thing that I've been saying for years to her, right? And they say it in just a little bit different way. And all of a sudden, the
Yep.
breakthrough happens. like the same thing happens by being exposed to other professionals and how they communicate and how they cue and how they do things. It can sometimes be that thing that really just takes you to that next level in terms of how you understand things.
Yeah, just has to be phrased just a little bit differently, and then it just kind of it clicks. You get it finally, and then you're like, oh, thank goodness, I finally understand it.
Yeah, well, I feel like it's the desensitization, right? You always smell the dog smell in the house. You don't notice the dog smell in the house eventually. You always hear the same thing. You don't hear the same thing. Like you live in the city, what's loud isn't the same as if you live in the suburbs, right?
Right.
All those things change. So having those different perspectives around you to challenge you really does help you to grow so much.
Yeah. It's such a cool experience. Like I said, I've never regretted going to one. I've never regretted learning something new or doing my CECs or anything like that. So if there's a takeaway I would give to, let's say a coach in the industry or someone who's looking to be a coach or go within this industry, not even just coaching, PT, strength and conditioning, all these different things, is to, just keep learning. Keep doing what you need to, keep learning, keep asking questions, because there's always going to be someone else who's asking that same question who, may be a little bit shy to do so. But then you ask that question, it's like, oh, okay, perfect. Now there's this wealth of information because I asked this question that I can now share with others, that I can, give to others and everything. So if you're wanting to get into the coaching world, do your research on things. If you want to get your degrees, do your research on things. We're a little biased here with USF. That was a great program, but so many great programs out there. Go Bulls. So many great things out there with different programs. Ask questions, certifications, like we talked about a little bit at the beginning, do your due diligence with those. There are a lot of quote unquote weekend warrior certifications that I would not recommend. They will usually just kind of, barely scratch the surface with some things, unfortunately, and then they slap you with certification. Boom.
That are still highly accepted and very well known.
They are.
And people think that they are super extremely high quality, but not necessarily.
Right. That's not always the case. Yeah. So, do your due diligence. If you want to do a certification, I would suggest, NSCA, ACSM, ACE, ISSN, NASM is another one as well. So those are kind of the ones that I would recommend to kind of look into for certifications, and then just connect with people. There was a guy who went to, was it the big one? Yeah, it was the one in Baltimore, where this guy literally knew nobody there. He sat behind my friend and I's conversation. We were sitting in a lecture, and they were doing like little things like, oh, take this question and now talk about it with the person behind you or the person to your right? So then we talked to this guy, and now we've connected on LinkedIn, kind of helping him out with things, asking questions and everything. So don't be scared to go up to people and ask questions. As scary as it can be sometimes, the worst thing they can do on LinkedIn is not return your message. And the best thing is that you make a good connection with that person.
I don't have a LinkedIn.
Okay, if you don't have a LinkedIn, social media.
Same difference, right?
Social media. Follow them on Instagram, send them a message, TikTok, whatever social media they're on. And again, the worst thing they can do is just not see that your request, that your like message request went through and they just don't see it. And the best thing is you make a connection on there. Maybe you see, that they're going to be at, a specific bodybuilding show, and you're going to the bodybuilding show, then you can kind of pick their brains on that.
Or that they see it and then they decide that they hate you and you're their new enemy.
That's probably the worst thing that can happen.
It totally happens all the time. I think that's a great place to wrap it up. So thank you guys so much for listening. Priscilla, we'll look forward to getting you back on the podcast again here soon.
For sure.
And have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, guys.